Tom?
Gotta make sure I'm unmuted. Tom Frank, did you hear that?
Yes.
You hear
Yes.
me?
Yes.
Okay. Tom Frank from Milton, and I'm roughing on my app camp here after it's raining now, but after the meeting, I'll go and hop in the hot tub there. So yeah, it's
Okay.
rough.
I guess Linda?
I'm Linda Sarnioki. I'm on the Board of Libraries and I'm from Weston.
Okay. And Adrian?
Adrian Katz, Williston, librarian for the St. Johnsbury Athenaeum.
Okay. And we have Jason, the state librarian, and we have, I guess, some staff attending as too, and someone labeled as +1 that may be someone else calling in. So we'll go from there. I'll discuss the agenda in a minute, but if someone is there from the public who wants to speak on items not on the agenda, this is your opportunity to do so. If you can raise your hand. Tom Murdo, are we still monitoring for people that want to speak?
Yes, good morning. It appears that there are no members of the public in this meeting today.
Okay, well then we'll go on. And if there were, I'd say too, that our protocol is not to have chat. I think that worked out really well at the hearing on the 17th of June. I believe everybody who wanted to speak or make a comment had an opportunity to do so. Tom and Josh did a masterful job letting folks in and then letting us know too that there was sometimes a little lag time between the time they were unmuted and could actually speak. So I really appreciate the staff for all it did at that meeting. I just want to say briefly, and people could add other things or change the order of the agenda, but Jason and I talked, and we think it's been a while since we've had a nice, good old discussion about what's going on with libraries in Vermont and what's happening with the department and its staff, and also later on for us as a board to have a good discussion among ourselves. Also about, like Adrian had a suggestion that it'd be nice if we could get together at some point and we can talk about that. Because as I discovered last night, being there is really important if you have the opportunity. We didn't think right now was the time to do it with this meeting, but we'll chat a little bit later. We'd like to reflect a little bit on our last hearing, but also going forward, Jason's got ideas of what we can do to help petitioners right off the bat understand what is expected of them in submitting a petition and what suggestions are. And we'll talk about that a little later. And so if everyone's all set with the agenda, or if has any questions or suggestions, we can proceed to Jason, essentially first on the library working group bill, and then for a more extended update on what's happening with what's happened with COVID, what's happening with libraries, what do we see going with the future, into the future, and also pick our brains, because there's some really talented people on this board. I really appreciate all of you, and I'm not just saying that. It's remarkable. It's remarkable. I wrote Jason this morning, but we got a contact from someone about the Negro Brook issue, and this person has so much talent and so much skill. They live in southern Vermont. I was not aware of them, but there are so many talented people throughout this state who are either from Vermont originally or came in, like our state librarian, who adds so much to the richness of knowledge in this state. So Jason, why don't I turn it over to you? Linda's got a question first.
Yeah, sorry. I noticed that we don't have any on the minutes. We don't have any, sorry, on the agenda. We don't have any item for approval of the minutes. Are we just doing that offline?
No, I'm glad I didn't notice that, but I looked at overall the minutes. Why don't we do that right now? Yes. If that's okay with everybody?
Well, to tell you the truth, I really, they came in late yesterday and I have not had a chance to look at them. They're quite long. I did read the Negro Brook one, which I thought was remarkably well put together, and I
Yes.
would congratulate you on that. But I haven't had a chance to really look at the other ones. So, I don't think I can.
Okay, we could put them up as make sure they're online as draft minutes.
Mhm.
Believe, and Sherry, are you trying to say something?
I think it's Deborah.
No, but they
Okay,
are all online on the website. But if anybody needs me to resend them, let me know.
and I've looked. I looked at all the minutes overnight, and I actually had reviewed. Sherry sent me the Negro Book hearing minutes shortly after the hearing, so I was able to review those and make some suggestions, which were incorporated. So they're pretty good minutes. All the other minutes too are very informative. We just have some fixes we could make, and we could make that at a later time at our next board meeting. But as long as everything's up there. And I do want to say minutes in Vermont by state law can be very minimal. Who was there? What was the agenda? Was anything decided? Were there votes? And that's it. From a historical record, you don't get much. It's pretty thin gruel. So I appreciate the comprehensiveness of these minutes. Obviously, minutes are not intended to be a transcript, and they are not, but it's a wonderful record of people that want to review things in the future and of use to the board. Frankly, I've looked at past minutes to refresh my memory on things and to use them positively in interacting with the public and the board. So if that's okay with the board, and I hear no objections, why don't we then postpone that to our next meeting, which will be the second Tuesday in October.
Fine with
Okay.
me.
Okay. Now, Jason.
Yes,
There you
good
go.
morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I am going to, I think, work to share my screen, which will hopefully allow you to see the current legislation for the status of the working group and what that actually looks like. It'll, I think, be easier to do it that way because I didn't want to deal with so much paper and make my report very, very long. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully everybody can see it. And I will be reading it just in case we have persons who are on the phone only. All right, it should have popped up. Is everybody able to see
Yes.
the document?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, perfect. So the update on the status of the working group on the status of libraries in Vermont, it was a report. It has passed, and so it is now enacted. Just letting you know the updates where we are looking to start our work in addition to what the requirements are. So this is like a refresher. And it also will talk about what the board itself will be doing as part of the legislation. Within it, as a reminder, we'll start off with the purpose and the intent is basically to review how things can be strengthened or supported of libraries of all sizes, particularly public libraries, and improving library services for Vermonters and the general public. The membership, of course, of the working group is the state librarian, and the state librarian will chair the group. The president of Vermont Library Association, the executive director of the Vermont Humanities Council or a designee, 3 representatives of public libraries geographically different and also size-wise will be appointed by the state librarian. We plan on having an application process, and we will make that available for libraries to apply for being on the working group by ourselves, and that will be coming out shortly. The second, item number 5, for school libraries, they are included as a way to also help us understand how public libraries interact with school libraries, or how we can do a better job in connecting with them, or look at some of the challenges of why it's not been able to be done uniquely. Prior to this, the Secretary of the State Education Agency was listed, but that has been changed to the Vermont School Library Association will be appointing those two representatives, they are in discussions, but also they're tired and they're out of school at the moment. So we are waiting to hear how they will plan to provide their two representatives to the working group. The next will also be the academics of the state get to chime in on how public libraries interface with them as well, or public facing institutions, even if they are private or profit, that do things in a public way, which people may access their library. For example, Middlebury College allows a lot of the public to come into their library free of charge to use the internet in a variety of different ways, and they have a host of events. So it will be an interesting discussion. So they will be also providing two representatives, what is known by VCAL, Vermont Collegiate and Academic Library Association will do that as well. One public library trustee appointed by the president of the Friends and Trustee section of the Vermont Library Association. We have been in discussions with VLA, and they too are looking at what processes they will be embarking upon to consider who will be on this working group as well. And then, of course, it talks about the powers and duty of the group. The things that we'll be looking at is kind of summed up in number one. Overall segments of the population as far as services, seniors, persons with disabilities, youth, children, immigrants, migrants, and people living in poverty when it comes to designated special services or just access in general. How are public libraries maintaining that? Given the past year, it's going to be an interesting conversation because they kind of had to do this in a very unique way when they became closed to the public for in-person services. And so a few things are now able to be examined in different ways. We'll also look at emergency preparedness, health and safety, diversity programs, economic development, such as small business or entrepreneurship at libraries. We'll also look at the impact of COVID on public libraries, and also the overall status, as you can see with the following items, which are broken out by specific components. Library programming and services of all calibers, different types of collections, how and what we have across the state, including special and historical collections. Facilities, which will be a very, very probably lengthy part of the entire report, which we believe, because there's a lot of challenges that were exposed during the pandemic. Technology is also another item, but this one will be more now nuanced because there is so much federal funding that has been given to states on technology. This is not going to answer itself fully, but this portion of the document will be one that will give a little bit of a wait and see approach. And you might say, well, what does that mean? For example, the state has decided to use some of its federal funding from the American Rescue Plan Act to the tune by the governor and the legislature approved of $250 million to bring the state up to speed as best it can, with the lower end of that, meaning they would like, which I am in agreement with, to try to bring broadband or technology services to 70,000 Vermonters who have no or very, very low internet. At the same time, trying to update and repair and bring new items for those of us who are connected in different areas, which might mean just expansion. For libraries, that also means money will be changing because of their towns. So with this, it might not be a here's a recommendation. It will probably be a status report of here is what is being done. Here is what we can expect. And if this works, this is what libraries can look forward to. And I'll get to how we also played a hand in this by obtaining some money from the administration and the state of Vermont for Fiber Connect, which Tom or Josh might also be able to talk to, because I don't always like to be center stage and be the only one talking. But each of the different areas have specific items, as I said, such as collections, facilities, technology, looking at all parts of it from our service and access points, different types of electronic catalogs and the host. We will be doing something that is normally not our ask or requirement, but state libraries do from time to time assess so they can understand, are we able to make things possible by making sure we have adequate staff and that people are paid their worth. So it's almost looking at something like what the federal government does with the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You just take an assessment and say, ooh, here's what it looks like. This has now been made more complex. So we all remember when these things started at the beginning, it was kind of very front and center, very easy. Well, the staff one is probably going to be very nuanced for us to capture because each library is so different. Staffing needs are so very different. Pay is very, very different. And we will do the best we can to kind of pull that out and make sure that it is understandable. But here's the new added element that I did not anticipate. As you know, we just all survived. Congratulations. It's unfortunate that about 600,000 Americans alone have died now because of COVID. And what that means is when you come through something like this, people then make decisions. We have lost a wonderful person, Laura Keenan, who decided to embark upon one of her early dreams, which is to go into IT, information technology. When that was not available, she did second tier, which I don't like to say that, but she did, which is libraries. She became a librarian. So to give you that example, a lot of people are doing that right now. We have, as I call it, the inverses are working at sides. If you know of couples who you kept wondering, why aren't you considering marriage? Now they're saying, yes, we actually want to get married. We survived. You might actually have people now say, oh, you know what? We want to be happy. We're getting a divorce. You want children, you don't want children, which also means I want a better job. I want more money. I'm going to quit. I'm going to retire. So right now, the world of work is in major transition. And so this one, it has now the added element of the library community going through a transition over the next several years as work itself for everybody starts to change. There's a lot of talk about true hybrid models, remote work, telework. What does it mean to now work in person? If it is, what types of benefits, what types of perks can also be given? So this has an added flair that will definitely add a nuance to what we wanted to do with it before, because the world of work is now changing. People are saying, I survived. And guess what? It's not all about money. It's about how I want to live the rest of my life. So I look forward to actually seeing what staffing, particularly the workplace and libraries, will look like, because you have to try to attract people. And right now, Vermont again is having one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country. And it's a challenge to find people to obtain jobs. Public input. We have a variety of ways on what we think we'd like to do with this, but it's definitely through assessments and surveys and questions and focus groups and meetings just to hear people talk about their love of libraries. I did share with you one that we did through UVM Center for Rural Studies. And if you were able to look at that, you would find the comments very interesting because it talked about, tell us why you love your library, tell us why you like your library, tell us why you think your library is neutral, tell us why you dislike your library, and even why you think your library should basically, guess what, be closed. The one comment I loved was a person who said, well, the only books in the library down the street for me that I like are the ones that I donated. They're the only good books at that library. So people have perceptions of what they think collections also should be. We will specifically look at C. We do need to do a reflection. So we will look at operations prior to 2019, including 2019 itself, the year of COVID and its impacts. And then we will try to use that information to project out at least 5 years what the status looks like going forward. Because again, the state is grappling with some interesting things that we now don't necessarily need to worry about, but can incorporate and say, if this occurs, this will ease or help in this redefining of what this looks like for libraries, broadband being one, housing, economic development in certainly some of these towns, attracting more people to the state. There's a whole host of things that we now can not talk about, but say the state has decided to take these challenges on, so the recommendations will be adjusted a bit. The board will be consulted and can actively participate in the discussions of all things. You are in an advisory role from a variety of areas, and you come from across the state. And with that, we will be seeking your input and also providing you lots of updates, but you also are able to be in the conversations if you so choose fully. This is a commitment. As you can see, we were able to get it to go out until 2023. It's not possible to do this type of report in a year. So we will be moving nice and methodically over the next 2 years to get this all done. The assistance, as you know, we, under the agency administration, have our AAG and can connect to a host of the state's legal resources. So we'll be using that. This did change where we were looking to have legislative counsel be that for us, but it has now been where we will use, in a sense, the agency and our own departmental connections to do so. We will report it in 2023, no later than November 1st, to the House and Senate Education Committees. Upon doing so, we will kind of seek approval, which has already kind of been granted, where we would like this report to be kind of disseminated largely than just these two committees. Everybody does say if this report is what it could be, a lot of them would like to see it. So we do plan to have a limited set of printed copies, but we will also make it very, very public so people can have it, because we've had towns tell us they want to see what this looks like, what they can or can't do. Almost most of the General Assembly would like to see it, the administration, of course, and a host of other people, including other states, said they would like to see this, because it appears we would be the first out of the gate to do this type of assessment coming out of the pandemic. And now other state libraries are considering, hey, we might need to do this too to get an assessment, because things have changed. The rest are all technical items, such as the recommendations, what we need to do and how we're going to do that, how the meetings will be set up. We cannot have more than 12 meetings. We were also able to increase the per diem with that, so $12,000, which is very, very nice. With that, I can thank a lot of the chairs of the committees, all the way back to Senator Jane Kitchell, Senator Brian Campion, and a host of other people who allowed us to understand that $2,500 might be nice, but it can be so much more when you can have some finances to really get in and do the questions and answering of reviews and pay people for their work and time for that. And that is it. The rest of the bill goes into education, and that is because our bill was wrapped into a larger education bill, and then that was approved. Are there any questions?
Just a comment. I think it's an amazing accomplishment that we are going to have that study group. So congratulations, Jason.
Well, thank you. You all also know it was a challenge, because you have all been here right with me from the beginning, and it was like, oh, it's happening this year. And then it was like, nope, it's not happening in 2018. And then finally we were able to get it passed through a lot of hard work and some revision.
Yes, I can see that.
Oh, Bruce, you're muted. And I think Linda goes next, but Deborah had her hand up too.
Yeah, I think Linda and then Deb, and I'm unmuted now, unfortunately, for the rest of you. Linda.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Jason, I agree with Maxie. This is great. It'll be very exciting to see what your results are and what the recommendations are. So I see that you still have some committee members, a number of committee members to be appointed. Are you figuring that you will start working in like November? So it will be exactly 2 years that you'll work, or the fall?
The request was per the legislation that we can start 45 days after it was signed. So we may try to do something, at least in communicating in August immediately, to see what people's tempo and feel are, because we're all in transition, and we believe the first meeting, unless people really want it, will probably be virtual. And then that will be going through the legislation itself to make sure we are all on the same page, and then how the department will be really the research and the provider of the information, and then asking for input, review of the work that we bring. And we do know, which we did tell both Senate and House committees and even administration, some of it we know is just not going to be there. And so we will then say, here's the next best thing. Here's what we recommend if that information is not captured, or it's too hard, or, ooh, this went beyond the scope, but here's what we can do with that. But we believe at the moment, we have about 60 to maybe 70% of the information can easily be obtained, with the remaining 30 being we have to create it. Like the staffing assessment would be something not new, but totally reviewed in a way where we have to think a little bit outside the box, given the current challenges of work in the workplace.
Right. So you expect to have your entire task force put together. I mean, all the membership of it established by the fall,
Yes.
or by August rather. So yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Great. That's great.
Deb.
Deb, you're muted.
I also wanted to express my awe awe, on all that you have done on so many different levels. I was worried that this was going to initially that this was going to become a real time sink. I'm not as worried about that anymore. And part of the reason I'm not is that I just think this is the absolute perfect time to be undertaking something like this. I think that libraries are at an inflection point, and this, I mean, we're seeing this with our tiny library. You know, the past is the past, and it may be somewhat indicative of the future, but the future is really different and has so many potential and possibilities because of what we just all lived through. And this is an opportunity to really think about how libraries can be transformational for their communities. And so I just think this is so exciting, and thank you for, you know, pulling this together so well.
Oh, thank you. We see it as our humble opportunity to really assess our own work. Even the department will be, in a sense, reviewed. Now, of course, we'll be the one reviewing, but we will also be asking people to look at our work and how we interplay primarily with the public, and of course, gently with the academics and with the school library. So this is also a reflection and review of the department and what it is doing currently and how it can improve its own services to help the libraries of the state. So it's a really, to me, wonderful deep dive, and the staff, I think, is actually excited, but we're all tired because we just came out of COVID. But we really do look at this as, wow, we want to see what this looks like because we want to see the data. We want to see what libraries are doing. And we expect to be wonderfully surprised, that we really do, on what to see what libraries are doing.
I just want to interject a couple of things. First of all, I think if I remember correctly, the kernel for this working group was planted by Maxie and former board member Rebecca Irwin from Middlebury, who met with Senator Ruth Hardy.
That is correct.
And I got goosebumps just saying that now, Maxie, because it shows influence of person-to-person contact, and particularly in a small state, can yield results. So I want to thank you. Rebecca's not on, you know, well, I can email her about this later, but I really thank you for that, Maxie.
Thank you, Bruce. And to go back one more step, it started with Rebecca and me going on a long, long drive together to one of the very small libraries, way near St. Johnsbury, way up north. And we started to talk about it, and then it started from there.
That's great. You know, for perspective for our newer board members, I think Deb and I are the longest serving board members. But you know, we used to get a report every year from the state librarian on the different standards and reporting with the different standards, and it really, I was always dissatisfied with that, because it really it had a lot of data in it, but it was hard to draw conclusions and really have a qualitative look at what was going on with libraries in Vermont. And so I think this is really a great opportunity. And the fact that you'll be studying it and asking questions means that you may discover things you didn't anticipate. And I know we have a grassroots library system, and we don't want to devalue small libraries that are very important to their community. For instance, you know, down there in Weston, you know, having been there, I guess now maybe a couple of times, you know, they mean something in ways we don't always know. Each library can have its own, quote, personality or spirit that really is important to that community. So it'll be fascinating to find out what's going on and imagine the future. So I'm really excited. And another thing too, I don't know if the board wants to consider designating a liaison who might be interested in attending all the meetings remotely or whatever. I mean, that's something. At some point, maybe some of the folks from the working group might want to come to one of our board meetings and give their perspectives as well, because obviously it's not the board study, but again, given this group of people, I think it would be a valuable resource for the working group as it goes on. Thanks.
Perfect. Well, I'm now going to transition us
Well,
into.
up, not
Deborah.
so fast. Yep, Debbie.
I just want to make one quick comment about Weston for thanks to the pandemic and the fact that there was a lot of online stuff. The board of our library, actually did read or listen to or partake of online stuff from Laura et al. And they came out of that wanting to do a strategic plan. So our library, in its 145 years of existence, is doing its first strategic plan ever. And I just love our board that wanted to, and staff that wanted to do that, but I'm grateful to the Department of Libraries because it wouldn't have happened without that kind of impetus of doing these kinds of things. Anyway, we just prepared our first survey, and it was, I'm not going to go into that in detail right now. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it, but it was really fascinating because we decided that we didn't really want to look back, because we didn't really want to necessarily be the library of the past. We really wanted to be the library of the future. So anyway, it's just kind of interesting. So we'll keep you posted on our survey, our results, etc. So anyway, that's my comment.
Quite amazing and wonderful to hear, because with this one-time funding, we hope that the library community will transition and transform itself into the libraries of the future. So we look forward to that.
Maxie.
I have one more question. Have you considered having a legislator on your task force?
We have not. They did actually consider it in the committees, both House and Senate. And this was a really active conversation. We told them that we were neutral to that. But I think when they actually decided to pass it, they removed, it was added and then they removed it. And I think it's because I'll be upfront, I think they're tired. I think at the time COVID was there and they might have told themselves, we can't get onto anything else. But they did actively ask us how we felt about that. And we were neutral to it, saying we are open to anybody being there. We're going to make it as public as possible. And we are open to suggestions, influence. And after that went, when it finally was passed, we noticed that it had been taken out as a consideration.
One thing I was thinking about, maybe for next year, once the legislature comes back, you might want to approach the chairs of the two education committees and also the two appropriations committees to see if they're interested in just a little mid-course update.
Oh, updates. Yes, I would definitely do that.
Yeah, I think that would be really cool. And, some of us, I think, have been before the legislature when they've discussed this bill. It really is wonderful when you see individual legislators smiling so broadly when they talk about their local libraries. I mean, a lot of legislators hear a lot of baloney over and over and over again, but the warmth and affection that comes through from individual legislators about their local libraries. So I'm really happy this is happening. I think it's wonderful. Deb, you're perfectly right. The timing is wonderful, and it's got a great chair of the working group. So now I'll transition, without any other further questions on this, I'll transition to Jason.
All right, thank you. So now we'll start the report. I'm going to just share it with my screen because I know some people are on the phone. I want to make sure you can hear at least what we are going through. And the others, I sent my report to you today. Unfortunately, I was down south visiting family and arrived back exhausted after a long drive, but it was really wonderful to do that. And this is why my report was late. And as I stated earlier, Pennsylvania is a really, really wide state if you're trying to go around it when there's a storm. So quite interesting. All right. In looking at where we are at now, the department, along with a lot of libraries, is connecting itself to the Agency of Community Commerce and Development, ACCD, might have said that a bit wrong there, in looking at the Vermont Forward Plan. And what that allows us to do is to make sure that we are following safety protocols while also reopening. The state of emergency has now been lifted, but we still are actively examining things at play, because if you are following the news, we are still monitoring the new variant of Delta, which is having an impact more largely outside the state of Vermont, because we are above 80%. But know that that is a very active thing and people are monitoring it. And so we still are asked to do things that are safe and making sure that we are aware of all those items. And we have passed that information on to our libraries as they too begin to open up. Our biggest item that we've been working on, which has taken up most of our time, um, from us acknowledging this was coming to us receiving it, is the funding from the American Rescue Act plan, which we basically call ARPA. The department received $2.1 million, about $2,135,000 is what we received. And we are making almost half of that applicable right out the door to libraries. From the time we got the money, of course, some people would say, wow, didn't you get that money back in March? Well, sort of, kind of. Know that we are actually probably going to be near the forefront of the state libraries of getting this money out the door. The reason for that is this type of money is rather large for some states, and we haven't had this in a while. And so you're able to think about, do you need staff? What does that look like? How do you get the money out? What can you purchase with it? What can you do with it? So a lot of discussions with IMLS was occurring so that we fully understand the parameters of what we could do with the money and how to distribute it. Luckily and nicely, we will not be doing what we did with CARES, which was we were able to do bulk purchases. In this case, we felt we could do that, but why not test some waters, because we want libraries to really tell us what their needs are. And then in doing that, we might help them differently. So under our discussions, Jeanette created a lot of surveys with Josh and Tom, and we reviewed everything. And with that, we put it back out to the community, and they kind of told us what they'd like to do. Once we assessed that through a needs assessment, we then talked with Sherry and Susan about what's the option of looking at this, along with our state finance office, which is, oh my goodness, there's tremendous people. If we were concerned about the little bit of money we have, you should know the state's finance department and the Department of Finance and Management and the Agency of Administration's Financial Services, they are just swimming in lots of things that they have to do, because guess what? The state of Vermont got $2 billion plus that it now has to grapple with and get that out the door with, I think, legally by the US Treasury. Half of that money is required to go to the towns. So that's also an interesting windfall, that all of our towns and cities across Vermont will be receiving set amounts of money in different ways to do things as well. So it's a really interesting chore where the finance department of the state in all calibers is running on all cylinders, because they have things they've got to do to make these protocols occur. What we decided to do is we are going to disperse funding by way of checks. And within that, right now, we had some requirements in making sure that they understood what the requirements were for IMLS. And we are helping libraries by having a variety of things that we have done, which was put out a lot of communication on the listservs, followed by we had a meetup, which were really required webinars, so they understood the parameters of what they have to do, how we were trying to assist them, and what they could and could not do. Followed then by creation of a budget, followed then by when the window of the application is open, which is now, they can import all that information in, make sure they're in compliance. And then once everything is reviewed and done appropriately, we will then sign off on grants, which will be me as the final person. If all libraries apply, it'll be 185 checks going out to libraries, which means 185 individual documents. You might say, oh my goodness, that's a lot. It is a lot, but guess what? The state of Vermont has to do 251 checks itself. So we're all in the same boat trying to do things, because as we all know, Vermont doesn't have county government. And because of that, we would have normally done 14 checks and then the counties disperse their money out. But since we don't, we are all doing it individually. So the state itself is grappling with how to get money out the door, in addition to the standard funding that we also have, which is the Library Service and Technology Act, or LSTA. I'm going to show you a little bit of what we actually have that will probably, hopefully allow you to understand the depth and work that the department has done. Please know that I only reviewed and gave commentary. This is really a large amount of this information and work was crafted by Jeanette and her team, all the consultants, Tom, Josh, and April did this, and Sherry and Susan also played a role in making sure that the financial conversations of people being sure they understood what the state requires is in this. So this is a very comprehensive but navigational tool to help libraries understand what we're doing. So you see the full amount at the top. We also provide the link to the needs assessment of what they told us. We list for them what you can buy things. A lot of it is outdoor and indoor equipment, furniture, dividers, upgrades to technology, things like that, things that are usable, because these should be one-time items. Things that you really should not buy, and we are telling them you can't, just stopping it at the door, because IMLS has told us, so we're telling libraries, this should not be for continuing services. And if it is approved, you would then have to decide, once the money runs out, which will be September 30th of next year, how you're going to pay for an ongoing item. So we've told libraries, please don't use this money for subscriptions. Please don't use this money for ongoing things, because this is really one-time money. Now, are there things you can do? Yes, you can consider shifting some things a bit. And as the federal government knows, and Bruce can tell you, this money is not to be supplanted. In other words, don't say, we are trying to tell libraries to make sure their library boards and their select boards know, just because we're giving you some money, please don't say, oh, the department gave you this, so we're not going to give you this allocation. You cannot do that. This is why we're asking for your budget, to make sure we see what the spending is and everybody's in agreement. But a variety of things can be done, and we give those types of ideas. With that, Tom will be hosting, along with Josh and Jeanette, another item, because we connect to the Massachusetts Higher Education Consortium, known as MHEC, where they talk about discounts. So we're trying to help libraries get their largest bang for their buck. And of course, the federal government requires anything above $5,000 to be approved ahead of schedule. So on to the money. So here is what you're going to see of how we.
Jason,
Yes.
could I just interrupt for a second?
Go ahead.
Too, most people know this, but I remember I learned it when I used to write federal law. There are generally two fiscal requirements attached to federal money: that you maintain your present effort, and that you supplement your expenditures, not supplant, not use the federal money to supplant your expenditures, not to feel, oh, we've got this, so therefore we can reduce our own local expenditures. It really is meant to be a boost and an addition to the library. And I think it's very wise not to pay for ongoing items. That becomes a problem. And it happens here at the state level as well with state funds. So I'm glad you pointed that out. I think it's very important. Thank you for the interruption. Yeah.
Tom, did you want to come on and discuss how we calculated this real quickly? Because this is your wonderful area of looking at the IMLS rules and then saying, here's how we can best do this under these requirements per the federal government. Oh, Tom, you might be muted. I see you, but I don't hear you.
Oh, I was muted in line, so sorry about that.
I was like, oh my goodness, I
up.
need library services for the deaf.
Well, we certainly do. Maybe not right this moment, but yes, thank you, Jason. The IMLS suggested that we use 3 factors when determining how to best target grant funds for ARPA. One of them is poverty. That includes SNAP benefits, so those 2 things tie together. We also looked at unemployment. Rather than have sort of a skewed unemployment rate, we looked at an average of 3 years in Vermont. We felt that that better reflected sort of the endemic need in certain communities, because COVID created several instances of ski towns that may have an unemployment that's approaching 20% for this year, but typically is in the low single digits. So we felt it would be better to kind of average that out. And then finally, broadband access. So we used the numbers available through the State Public Service Department to look at how available broadband is for people in different areas of the state. So between those three factors, we felt that we could use those to affect the amount of money that's going to different libraries. So to start at the top here, actually, we started with $1.50 per person in terms of area served. So obviously smaller areas are going to have less money, and then a town like Burlington is going to be higher than that. So essentially what I did is I took the $1.50 and then I ran it through those other factors. Of course, those factors are relative to state averages. So if they're below average, they get a little more money. If they're above average, they get a little bit less. It was not a huge influence on the amount of money, although some towns certainly are receiving more. Finally, what we did is we looked at the raw numbers. So if you look in column B of the sheet, and all of this is available on the ARPA page, as Jason said, if you'd like to look more closely at it. Column B is sort of that base amount of those three factors. We went back and said, hey, actually, because in order to make this an important, impactful grant for every library, we wanted to start with the $2,000 minimum. And so that affected, I think just over 30 libraries that brought them up to $2,000 from a lower amount. You can see quite a few in there. It looks like we're sorted by grant amount here. So
Yes, I did that.
okay, yep.
Just
So
to
you
show
can
people.
see there's quite a few that get boosted up to 2,000 from that. The rationale there is, of course, that books don't cost less for libraries that are smaller. Heating, certainly they may be heating a smaller space, not necessarily, but a lot of those base costs are built in, and we felt that it would be important to bring it up to 2,000. Also to encourage people to participate. A lot of those little libraries we don't really hear from much. That's certainly not due to us trying to reach them. Actually, yeah, the number of that hits 2,000, I'm sorry, is I think it's closer to 60. So we're hoping that by putting that 2,000 out there, making this as transparent as possible. As you know, transparency is very important to us at the department. It's become sort of our main issue, I think, in many ways with the department following. Well, I won't go down that road, but I feel that we're certainly being very consistent with that. Yeah, it looks like 69 libraries got their money boosted up to $2,000. So we hope that we can get close to 100% participation by putting this information out there. Also, having the transparent amount out there means that those libraries that we don't ever hear from, we can contact somebody in the community and say, hey, there's money waiting here. Maybe you should ask your librarian to go ahead and apply for that. So I think that there are tools here that we can use to try to get that number as close to 100% participation as possible. We put this money out there because we want to grant it. We want people to use it. We want it to go to those communities. So we're feeling really good about where we are with this. I think the applications are already trickling in. So it's an exciting time for us to be able to give away almost $1 million.
Well,
Perfect.
Tom, I'm so happy to hear that you put in, I call it a small library minimum, because at the federal level, when I was on the Hill, we put in a small state minimum of 0.5% of certain appropriations, because small states still have base needs to cover. And if you do it on a straight population basis without a minimum, you're not going to get great service to the small states. So I really commend the department for making that decision. And then the other comment is, when would this money be going out so you can make an assessment of participation? And then Adrian's got a question after me.
We plan on dispersing it. I know starting the process of getting it all ready in August, but we're looking at probably, Tom, you can correct me, I know maybe mid-September, October is when things would be really rolling out, with October being really the date the money should be getting out the door.
Yeah, the application closes around this time next month. So we'll know by mid-August how many libraries are participating. And we're looking at that leftover money, and we're going to roll that into other grants.
Okay, thank you. Adrian.
Yes, so fantastic to have that goal of transparency, and it's quite impressive what is assembled here. Could you speak a little bit more towards the service area population? I think about a library like the St. Johnsbury Athenaeum, where we're not only serving the surrounding towns, but we also that are smaller, and some of which, for example, may not have access to broadband. But also we serve communities just over the border in New Hampshire. So I wondered how you factored that in, if it was more of the population, or did you take those other things into consideration that a library serves beyond its town or city?
And we also have Josh on, who's our state data, who can also chime in too.
Right. Yeah, I'll probably let Josh pick this up, but I will say a couple things to that. First, New Hampshire gets their own money, so they're going to pay for their own folks. Sorry, we can't do that. We do understand that some of our border libraries certainly do serve populations that go over the border, but to some extent, this is a blunt instrument. I want to be clear about that. We've done our best to try to ascertain these numbers and make them as realistic as possible. I will tell you that we got the numbers for poverty, broadband, and unemployment from reputable sources. The Census Public Service Department and Department of Labor is where those come from. So we're feeling pretty good about those numbers. The service area population, and I'll let Josh pick this up, but my understanding is that that is the numbers that are reported to us from libraries. Josh, why don't you hop in and pick that up?
Sure. Yeah. So the service area population has been we've using basically a kind of finessed system of what we've been doing all along. This gets used for the annual reports, aka the public library survey, and that's where the data mostly comes up. The system that we use is, and again, it is a somewhat blunt instrument, but the way it works is that libraries are, for the most part, allotted the population of areas that give them tax support, more or less. So sort of on let's see. So basically, if you're a library in a town and you're the only library in a town, you're allotted, and you get tax support, you're allotted the entire population of the town. Boom. If there are two libraries in a town, they share it based on who gets more tax support. If they get an equal amount, it would be 50-50. If they don't, it's broken up roughly based on how they receive that. There are a few more wrinkles. If there's a library in a village and the village supports them, then that library just gets the village, and that's sort of removed from the allotment. But in general, that's the gist of it. It's based on how who provides tax support. And actually in the annual report, I will say there's, like, for example, there's one wrinkle in the annual report, not here. Haskell Library, which is on the border, also receives money from Canada. So that service area is included in their figures, but because this is Vermont only, we've lopped those out. But in general, service areas are determined based on what library, who gives you tax support. Additionally, for this case, if there are towns who have libraries that don't provide any tax support to that library, we have still allotted the full town to that, the full town population to those libraries, because they're the only library in the town. And then that is basically the gist. Oh, the one exception, sorry. If there is I know I'm getting into the nitty gritty almost immediately, and I apologize. But in the cases where there's a town with multiple libraries, one of whom doesn't really receive any tax support, they are not allotted any population, but they get the $2,000 minimum as for existing, basically. Does that make sense? I know it's a little complicated.
No, it just shows the level of detail we needed to think through, because we knew these questions would be coming. And Bruce, I think Tom has a question.
Yeah,
If
I see.
Adrian is finished.
Tom, yeah, if Adrian's done. Okay, Tom.
For example, well, I'm in Barton now, though I don't live here. I have my camp here. Like the it's always every town meeting. Orleans Jones Library gets 1,000 from the town. Barton gets 100 because Jones has like a $1 million endowment and Barton doesn't have any. So I assume you're taking those things into account. But the other thing is the 20 census data available yet? Because they always do population.
I can tell you about that as the former chair. It is being churned out with the expectation being they still are going to hold to the standard. They want to get out as soon as possible, but September is the deadline for them to fully push out all the information. They
All the
did
data,
need to give the states information because the US Treasury was cutting the checks of billions of dollars to each state. So they had to give the states at least a top tier amount of population data and demographics so they could make choices of how they were going to utilize the federal money that they were getting to the state. So the state has a little bit of it, and also because of redistricting, the state had to receive some census. But the information that we would all like to see, that's kind of going to come in September.
And September. Okay, very good. Because I, in the past, for other projects with the state, I've used that, and it's great data.
Yeah.
So just to add onto that, this data, the population figures are based on the 2019 version of the American Community Survey 5-year estimate, because that's just what we've always used.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, and I'm glad you went into how you tried to, even though it's a blunt instrument, I immediately thought of Kellogg Hubbard Library in Montpelier, which I guess does serve some of the surrounding municipalities. And I remember another Josh who used to be on this board, and he had been chair of it, and he would have asked that question. And I know there are other libraries. I think the new library the library in Manchester, I think, also does provide some services to outlying areas. But anyways, I'm glad you thought that stuff through as best you can.
Perfect. And within that, if there's no other questions, I'm going to continue on from the item, but the web page is really detailed. We also created a listserv where the libraries can get together. We will not really be chiming in on that or really monitoring it to talk to each other about ideas. We also encourage resource sharing. Just because you got some money doesn't mean that you can't talk with another library to pool your resources to do something as well. That is also encouraged. And within that, if a library says, hey, we don't have enough money, we're giving them ideas to say, you can ask your town for funding as well. In addition to, I say, go back to the early days of Vermont when there are some things when it comes to construction versus installation. Construction should and cannot be funded. But it doesn't mean you can't buy items. For example, we've had libraries say, we like to buy a gazebo, and we know exactly why. It is something you can buy, but guess what? Your staff will have to do it for free. Or why not connect with the town and say, on this day in our village, we're having a gazebo raising day. We're all going to come to the town center, go to the library, and we're going to help the library do this for free. Or if you have funding, you can pay a contractor or somebody to do that, because there are limitations on installation versus construction. When installation, think of it as already included. If you're buying IT items, the IT setup is something that would be paid for as part of the entire project. But if you are having to construct something, then IMLS, per the federal government, says no, you cannot. So we're helping libraries navigate that nuance, because some people think, well, I can't do it now at all. And we're saying, no, you can still buy the item. Now you've got to figure out, before you get this money, if you got it, how would you physically put this together? So our goal is giving libraries a long period of time to think about all of these things, because when that check is cut, we expect the money to get out the door. We do sell this as the way the plan is also to be promoted. This is a jobs plan. It's an economic plan. It's a consumer plan. That's what this plan is, to get the economy going back into a more positive phase, which means purchasing and creation across the economic sectors. In addition to the listserv, we also are available for office hours. Jeanette is not available with us today because she's having, guess what? Office hours with libraries who want to ask questions about ideas of what they want to do, anywhere from collections to IT to a host of things. And we are accepting those questions to help them and make it easy. We have told them our goal is to make this entire process as easy for you, because the worst thing that you want to hear, if I remember the old saying about the federal government, is, be wary when the government says, "Hi, I'm Jason Broughton, and I'm here to help you." So you want to make sure that you can live up to that standard of actually being helpful, and we definitely aim to do so. In addition, we have an FAQ page to let people go to that first, and if it's not been answered, then we have a form that they can submit to our staff directly, which we triage, and maybe from time to time, even I might get a specific question that they might need. I'm also able to come out to library boards, parts of our team also, but I am more so interested in, if needed, in library boards and select boards who might have questions, to talk to them about the importance of this money. We have had some people let us know that there are reservations about accepting the funding, and it's not because they don't want to, it's because of sentiment. And so my goal is to see if we can make sure that all of our libraries who wish to have this money are able to obtain it per their towns and their villages. Going on, the rest of it just talks about the ideas. So we will be doing some light technology grants again in the future, but some of the remaining money grants, we're looking to do a meetup, in a sense, by having a creative endeavor between libraries and local historical societies and museums, get them talking together and seeing what happens with that. We're really reviewing anything that we can do, such as services or an applicable purchase for public-facing or state-associated academic libraries. There are some logistics that we are displeased with, such as a lot of academic institutions might have an administrative thing they take right off the top, and we are looking to see to not have that happen with this money, if it can be done. Services and training for public library trustees, services for school libraries we're going to be doing, such as the SMANC movie license. You should know that has gone over in such a wonderful way when the pandemic hit. I don't have the stats, but I definitely remember even the movie house itself, Swank, let us know it was beyond wonderful. We had I think something like 66,000 movies in the public schools being played by teachers in an educational way. Now, did some of them really have it for education? No, because guess what we did? We bought it statewide. So if you were at your house, who says that, the Fast and the Furious is not educational? So it becomes just an item of people watched what they wanted to watch. And we have had so many school librarians tell us it's amazing, and we are extending that for another year. We're looking for things to also increase participation in the courier services. So Tom and April Shaw we'll be looking with that, but Josh doing some assistance. We definitely will be doing grants to the Able Library to increase services and collections for the disabled and the vision impaired. And we're also adding some hearing impaired devices so that we branch off into other aspects of helping people who are differently able. We will also be doing not open calls, but talking about requirements for library consortia to obtain funding from us for different platforms, and of course funding the ebook platform that we will be navigating through. We can't really talk about it too much because we are still under an RFP process, but we are really, really pleased with what we're seeing. Then we will be doing things for additional considerations. We might do some things with arts, humanities, different types of groups that improve library services across the state. And last but not least, we will be doing things regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. Tom has already talked about the requirements of IMLS. This is just here for you to see why we had to put those in. And it helped libraries understand there are many buckets and it's open, but you still have some boundaries that you cannot cross. And that was there for them to know. Any question on ARPA and how we are navigating this for libraries?
Well, I have quick comment. I think it's fantastic that you're using the listserv for office hours. I don't know if that's been done in the past, but I think it's a wonderful asset. And
we also have it as a webinar as well, but it allows people to talk and we also to kind of say, oh, let's see how we can help.
Yeah. Now, what is the reaction you're getting from libraries to basically these federal requirements?
We believe they were speechless at first. There was not a lot of conversation. It was almost like stunned. But they let us know really after they went through the webinars just how appreciative they were. And what we noticed was really not questions, Bruce. All of a sudden, ideas, which means they were thinking, well, can I buy this? What happens if I do this? Is this able to be purchased? Some of them have just gone out of the box in ways where we're like, this is amazing. You have libraries talking about upgrading patron services such as public computers, different types of technologies, robotics, STEM and STEAM things for the community, things for seniors, just a host of things that can be done. And it just means they're thinking. They're like, oh, now that I know what the parameters are, I think I know what I want to do with this money to help my community.
Well, I think that's important too about their initial reaction, because libraries aren't necessarily accustomed to getting a decent amount of money from the feds through the state, are they?
That is correct. We let them know up front. It is so rare for us to do this. The last time was many, many years ago. And even then, it was not the federal government. It was through a wonderful donation where we have the remnants even still remaining. And yes, it has been a rough year where I have not been able to get us together for distribution of funds out the Vermont Public Library Foundation. But that is also still applicable. It's a little bit of money left. But within that will also assist. But that was so long ago. But for the federal government to say, here is the money. And the wonderful thing that libraries were also told, which we did not say, is guess what? There is no match to this. No match. And we are doing this through reimbursement, which means we're kind of doing sub-granting light is what I call it. We are basically giving them enough leeway because we trust our libraries. We believe we're there, where they will basically give us receipts. They're going to work with our internal finance staff, Sherry and Susan, and Jeanette doing some items, Tom occasionally based on the purchasing. And we are going to basically check in with them frequently to say, you know, if you've never done this before, you've got to pace yourself. Because next year this time, we are going to start telling you we need to see your receipts because September is coming and we have to also start reporting. So we will probably be asking for them to wind things down like late July and prepare for August to start gathering all those receipts. But if you do it from day one, when the final call comes in to give us your receipts and paperwork, it's already gathered, you review it, and you can turn it in, as opposed to what did I do a year ago? Because if we all think about it, I can't remember what I really did last year this time during COVID, other than be anxious and just grounding myself in work. But if you said, I talk with you, I would be like, I don't remember that. I would have to go back into my email list or phone record to say, oh, I did talk to you on this day, and I don't remember what we said. Because last year is such a different time. So we hope to make it easy by constantly letting them know what they should do at different stages and be prepared to do going forward.
And then the department, you have to report to IMLS.
That is correct.
And they're overseeing you.
Yes.
Okay.
So we figured we have a wonderful way of doing this. Some states have always been doing it this way. Vermont has not necessarily done that, but we now feel we understand the libraries understand us, and we are actually doing a form of sub-granting, and we're going to see how this works. It's either going to be wonderful and amazing, or guess what? It's going to be, as they say, a spectacular collapse. If you're going to do it big, which means if you're going to be wrong and be big. So we hope to be in the positive, though.
Okay, well, thank you. Any questions or comments from the board?
All right, well, I'll continue forward then, Chair.
Just a second. Yes. I see someone listed as guest, and I don't know who they are. Is that the terminal in the department or what? You see that under
Bruce,
people?
Bruce, I'm not seeing that. I see 11 people in the meeting. Me, Adrian, Jason, you, Deb, Linda, Maxie, Josh, April, Tom Frank, and Sherry.
And funny, I see someone labeled guest.
Now you might see
Well, sometimes sometimes people are labeled guest. The board members have parentheses guest after their name.
True.
We've certainly seen occasional weird anomalous non-existent people in teams when it is being so it may be one of those.
Okay.
You know, it might be Debbie was on her phone to begin with. Maybe that's her phone thing that's still connected or something.
That's true too.
Okay, because I just want to make sure we count all the guests and everything else. So, okay, Jason.
All right, perfect. Moving forward to what's going on in state government. This will be a little bit quick. Tom, be prepared for you and Josh to step up once again, because this will be a part of that. We've already done the working group bill. But for your awareness, we were able to be successful with the Secretary of State's office in updating the printing and distribution item that we had requested, which means we are reviewing our processes for how we distribute all of the state items, such as the Vermont statutes and annotated pocket parts, directories, and a host of things. You might not know that, but we provide all of that to state government and a host of other people outside of state government. We have now refined that to make sure we stay within the parameters of why we should be doing things a certain way. And that was a quite interesting conversation with the committees, because some people let me know they didn't understand how this was working or why it needed to change, because they were basically getting their books for free. Well, in our case, we needed to let people know upstream who might just order books, not know downstream. We do all that work. And this has been almost like a 20 to 30 year operation where it needs to change and be updated from being manual. So we manually get the books here, we take them out of boxes. And here is the sad part: when all of the requests have been completed, we still retain a large amount of those books, sometimes up to 300 to 400 of those items. And then guess what we do? We recycle them. And they sometimes are totally brand new. So never gone to any legislator, has not gone to any committee, has not gone to any entity that wants them, and they must be changed if there is an update. So think about it. Every year, the legislature updates or tweaks or changes or adds something to the green books, as we call them. The old books are kept at a certain minimum just for historical and information requirements. Tom could talk about the full items of it, but we retain a smaller set. The rest of those have to be recycled. We just can't keep those. We also were required, if you did not know, by legislation many years ago when we were created, you might not be aware of this, but we were required to keep 100 copies of everything. Think about that. 100 copies. And we just said that the state must give us a new building. So you know how that went over with my agency secretary. And so the goal was we will be doing some reduction of these actual items. We believe we've gotten it where a lot of people will be happy, but Tom is the lead in this, and he will be having conversations with a variety of people across the state about the updates and tweaks. Tom, did you want to add anything about this little quick bill before I get into the bigger conversation for you and Josh to talk about Fiber Connect?
Oh, sure. Just that we're very happy that this change was made. It's going to reduce waste. And I also would like to note to the board that when Linda Bullard took over this program, she was pointed to what she described as a heap of books in the basement room in the pavilion known as the dungeon, and said, "You're in charge of this now." And she, over the last 15 plus years, 20 years, has organized that into a highly functional and well organized situation. So all praise to Linda for this. I will say that the ultimate goal would be for people to use the online statutes as they are updated ahead of when the printed materials come out. In fact, the online statutes were, I think, updated as much as 2 months before we receive the printed materials. So it feels a little redundant to some of us. So this is a big step in that direction. Will certainly reduce the burden on us as far as handling literally thousands of volumes every year. So we're excited about this.
All right. We had our budget pass as it was rolled into the agency's overall budget. And then we have something that came to us by way of a wonderful opportunity based on our work with the Department of Public Service, in which with the federal funding coming, they were in broadband discussions. I was a part of those items looking at the state's overall plan. And within that, we understood some items that could be helpful for some of our libraries based upon the need to extend broadband services and upgrade them for persons across the state. In that case, libraries across Vermont are always to me considered anchor institutions. And within that, we had a system that was degrading and literally is being held together with spit, duct tape, and wire, thanks to Josh Muse. Within that, the governor was able to understand the item along with the legislature and approved us to the tune of $500,000 to upgrade the Fiber Connect network. Josh and Tom, anything you want to add on this? Because we are just thrilled to know that we now can update the system. And our intention, as promised, is this is a one-time thing because the state says that it will go in a unique direction of helping communities find sustainable and affordable broadband options in about 5 or 6 years up until 2030. So our goal is to upgrade our system. As the state changes itself, this then will change and libraries will come off of the Fiber Connect network. Tom and Josh, I'll let you talk about how, and they are spearheading this, and you do not understand. Tom and Josh worked feverishly when the opportunity came, sometimes 12 to 18 hours a day into the night, because these conversations were rapid and quick and needed to have lots of things. And in the morning, we then had to deal with committees. So it was a wonderful opportunity, and we are pleased to also have this new legislation appear before us in the tune of funding. Tom and Josh.
Yeah, it was touch and go there for a while. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes. Well, first of all, I know Tom's got a question, but why don't you go on? I'm glad you're saying it was touch and go for a while, because this had to be almost saved at the last minute, did it not?
It did. Jason got us into the hearings and we pleaded our case during reconciliation and they added the money in. And I know that that's highly unusual for that to happen. And it certainly says a lot about how the department is now viewed in the legislature, and kind of the fact that Jason was able to get us in there to talk to people, and our case was heard and that money was added back in. So it was exciting there for a while, and certainly very satisfying for us to be able to get that money in at the last minute.
I will say in a funny way, in the committee hearings, they did ask me, well, what happens if we don't fund this? And I had a really basic response. To who shall I contact when the library boards in the community becomes upset? And they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, we just going to turn it off. Who do I direct the complaints to? Because we no longer would be doing this. And that wouldn't say change the tone, but it was quite unique where people understood we could not do this. And if you didn't help us understand the problems that the libraries were going to face with their communities, we could do nothing. And people understood that immediately and said, oh, but this plays into a larger plan. And they thought it was very successful. Tom's not going to fully, but we are playing a part until the communication union districts get themselves together in some cases, and the libraries will be central to that when they actually arrive, and then things will change once they come up to speed. Josh, anything you or Tom want to add on that last piece? And then I know Tom Frank has a question too, yes.
No, I don't think so. I think you covered the project overall pretty well, and but we're happy to answer any additional questions.
Okay, Tom, Frank.
Yeah, Justin, hopefully they're mowing the lawn out there now, so I'll say it fast. Starlink for the very, very rural areas. All I know is when they were sitting out looking up at the stars the other day, my son was pointing out there's 6 Starlinks in a row going overhead. So I didn't know if just ignoring that, or is that a temporary situation, or if anything that you know about it.
Starlink's startup costs are rather steep. It's about $500.
Yeah.
So that digital divide is still going to be there. And that's really what we're looking at, is trying to get broadband to people in a way that is affordable. I know that this is not necessarily relevant to Vermont, but those Starlink systems have been failing in Arizona, which is one of their test areas this summer, as it's gotten very hot, and they will not function over, I think it's 120 degrees, which if you've been out in the sun, you know it can get that hot out there, an object can. So they have been failing. So there's still some work to be done. I know that it's pretty extraordinary because you'll be able to get internet all over the world. Places that are extremely remote will be able to get internet, which is very important. But I think in the Vermont, we're taking a course that I think is prudent, which is we're pretty far down the road on actual fiber cabling. And I feel like that is going to best serve the needs of Vermonters certainly in the immediate future and probably for the next 10 to 20 years. Starlink certainly will be there for those that do not get reached and can afford it. But I think the fiber networks, as they're set up with the CUDs, will be the most, let's say, affordable and equitable way of getting internet to folks.
And Starlink is that Elon Musk low altitude satellite system. Is that true?
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Jason, back to you.
All right. Last item within that would be the update on Build America Libraries Act. As you know, the federal government is looking at trying to pass a federal infrastructure plan. Again, it would be similar to ARPA, in which the state would get money. And if they put libraries into the plan, which we are not, IMLS would be restarting something that they used to do but had stopped kind of recently for a while, which would be construction. We know what could occur. We have been in contact with each of our congressional leaders. I mean, I say we, Vermont Library Association, but I specifically have been in touch with them. And if this were to pass, they have given me some information that is quite pleasing if it should pass, but it does mean additional work in a positive way. We would be receiving construction dollars by the federal appropriator, IMLS, once again. The floor, let me start with that. If passed, unless they really just change it, if libraries are included, IMLS, we get a large amount of money. Vermont could see a minimum of $10 million for construction projects specifically. And if certain senators have their way, it could go as high as $17 million for construction, which would immediately change, again, the physicality landscape of Vermont to help libraries with accessible entrances and upgrades and ramps and a whole host of things. And broadband would also be a part of that. But we will see what will happen because that conversation is evolving and continuing, but no current update other than they're still talking about it. So that kind of ends my report on that. And if there are no questions, we can transition into geographic naming.
Yeah, if there are no other questions, let me introduce this a bit and Jason can pipe in. We thought it was useful to talk about the things I think staff and I have learned over the recent submission of the Negro Brook petition. I don't need to rehash all that. But I think one thing is very important, and Jason and I have talked about, is trying to make, I guess we have to look at what we can provide to petitioners that is very obvious up front so that they know we're looking for certain things ahead of time. As you know, our state statute is pretty thin. Lauren, before she left for Alaska, put together some recommendations we haven't gotten to. So Jason can talk a little bit about that. And I just may take a little time later to tell you a brief story. So Jason, go ahead.
Perfect. I'll get into this because I know we're going to get into term limits toward the end. So we're all aware as we prepare for next year. So I'm again sharing the screen. And with that, for everybody who is just on the phone, it's showing the State Board of Libraries web portal area that we have on our website of our members who's listed, and specifically the items regarding geographic naming. If you click into the link that were to say geographic naming policies, here is where Bruce talked about. Lauren reviewed this and was just wonderful in giving us some updates because she wanted to tighten up a lot of the items because we already are in parallel with the federal government, the USGS and the US BGN. And she wanted to make it a little bit more explicit so people just understood, oh, this is why the state board does this way. The unique thing about it is you haven't always been doing this since the inception and alignment with the federal government. It has been inferred. And based upon the recent experience that we all had, I began to notice commentary that stated about, well, that's not in your rules. But for example, all of us on this board fully understand to do things a certain way means there has to be a beyond an assumption, which would be if you're going to start a petition, the most successful petitions, of course, you're going to have to talk to the local community. If you don't, that's going to be quite challenging to be successful, don't you think? Well, that's an inference that we as a board have always had, and that has also been a Vermont way of doing things. It's just this inference of course, you're going to talk to the local community. That's the best way to do it. Well, guess what? We might now need to make this more explicit. Explicit means not digging fully into forcing people to give every detail, but it could be as simple as a check-off box with a comment. Did you talk to the town? Yes or no? What was the response? Did you meet with the select board? Did you talk with the historical society? Did you have any public forums or commentary? This is more like a checklist that allows the board to know, even if those things were not successful, attempts were made, and when those attempts were made. A lot of the things that we experienced with the prior petition, believe it or not, were now actually done, but some of them were done way after the fact, even though the board had requested they be done from the outset and the department advising the petitioners they needed to be done to be successful. So in looking at this, we are now understanding that we believe it is best to have updated items that allow petitioners to fully understand this. What you should know is the department has always done this through Sherry, April, and Lauren, and myself as needed to petitioners before they begin. But that also might be something that we need to do to say, before you even come onto our website, we ask that you connect with us so we can have a conversation with you about the entire process. That way, you are in full understanding before you start that petition, because that's the goal. Once the petition comes into our hands, guess what? That's kind of it for the board. The board now only has 3 options, as you know. You will then have to have it shuttled to you to vote up, down, or table, and tabling is only holding it until the board would make a decision on how it wants to act. So our goal is to not have the petitioners not waste time, but fully understand before that petition comes to us all of the things. Additionally, we give petitioners all of the information before they start the petition, because those conversations are held, which are, here are the things that we found that are negative on the name that you want. Here are the things that we found that are positive. Here are some historical documents. We want you to connect with archives because we found they told us some things. We want you to go to Historical Society. So these are the ways that we are thinking in how can we improve information where petitioners know upfront from the outset, before the petition is started, what else is needed that they should know. So I have on the screen just the current items showing you what is given to petitioners, saying if it's about transportation, here's where they go, state buildings, here's where they go, areas of land, here's where they go, followed by what the statutes are regarding spelling, the authority to name different things again, the actual procedure, the standards that we have related to historical events, historic persons, flora, fauna, native to Vermont, names characteristic to Vermont and its traditions, local names and places. And then we get into the specific naming policies that say the board can and cannot do certain things. And within that, people are again discussed with this up front, which occurred. And then finally, it gets into the naming petition once everything else has been provided, such as research as to why they want to name something provided to the department. Then they go off, get it done, and it shows what they also can provide as supporting documentation. Available maps on the feature, which we have to check anyway, letters of support, additional documentation concerning the history of the feature and the name, additional documentation for reason for proposing. And we also will be doing this ourselves to make sure they can understand, here's what we found. We have always done this to show people, oh, you might not have thought about this, but here's what we found. Take this, go back and discuss this with who you would like before you start your petition, and let us know how you feel. Some people say, oh, I didn't know this, we need to not use this name. Other people say, oh, we're in agreement, this is wonderful. But few people say, I don't care, I'm doing what I'm doing. Very few people say that. Followed by the information comes to me, and then it's the petition. What are your thoughts from your experience, the past petition, and all of your experience on geographic naming that might be more helpful, in which the department can put this into the document And the end result for us is we would like to put this through state government and have this codified once we get all of this done. It's not immediate. It could start next session, but I believe this might be another year after we flesh this out and then put it through state government to say, here are the official rules. And then we would pass this on also to the federal government to say, here are our tweaks and adjustments.
Well, I think it really is important. It is going to take some work, but it would be nice. I like the idea of a checklist too. You know, if you can boil it down, so people know ahead of time. And of course, I really do think it's really important before you submit your petition, please contact us. We're here to help. And I know the staff has been helpful in certain circumstances to potential petitioners. I think in my experience on the board, and maybe Debbie can help me because we've both been on the same length of time, we have actually turned down 3, maybe 4 petitions. And a big problem, like with a Scutney, there was no local support from what we could find, although there was an attempt to do so. Prosperity Peak, they did not go to the locality ahead of time, and we had to ask them to. And of course, it was the same with the Negro Brook. We did have one petitioner who wanted to name a pond that belonged to the state in the back of his estate, a big financier from New York, and he wanted to name it Zen Pond. And we rejected that and told him start again because of the requirements for flora and fauna native to Vermont. So, but I think it's really important to advertise ahead of time. We have a brief checklist for things for you to consider, and at the top of the thing, I think the top of the list, and we can talk about it at another meeting, is check with the State Department of Libraries first before you go too far down the road. I think that would be helpful. Any thoughts from the board?
I think Deb has a question.
Yeah, well, it's not a question, it's a comment. I specifically wanted to thank the staff because one of the things that has been happening is that, and it's important that that before the board gets an application, it really should be complete. And so that puts some, burden on the board, on the staff to make that happen, unless you also want to have the board be involved in that. But it seems like we don't want to set up a hearing until we know we have a complete application. And I think perhaps somewhere in your instructions, and I'm really, really delighted that you're working on some, consumer friendly instructions, but somewhere in your instructions say, we will not be able to have a hearing until it is determined that your application is complete. And we see this a lot in zoning stuff because we don't want to get permit applications for, something's missing. It's a waste of time to bring people together to look at stuff. Anyway, that's just my thought.
Perfect, thank you.
And Linda?
Thanks. I agree with Debbie that I'm very impressed with the research work that your staff has done. Jason, it's great to read all of that, and it's a tremendous amount of work. I would I don't know if this is appropriate to add here, but it seems to me that both the Page Brook application and the Negro Brook application foundered early on the issue of whether they had consulted with First Nations people. And so I think it would be good to have one of those check boxes be to make sure that people have done research on all of the historical residents or occupiers of any particular area.
Okay.
Perfect.
Good suggestion. Tom Frank.
And I was just going to say it's have to be careful, I would say, because once they submit a petition and it meets the statute, we have no choice, right, Jason? We
That is
have
correct.
to deal with it. We have
That
to
is
deal with it, even if on the checklist they didn't. Unless as Jason, as you said, we can get it codified and put it as statute, which is important to do. Then we can make sure if they don't check it off, that it isn't meeting the requirements.
That is
Good-
correct.
good.
And the board,
good.
I guess, has already done that continuously to say your application looks incomplete. Do you mind? Because since I've been here, the board will always go through it and say, ooh, could you do this for us? And so far, everybody has. But the last petition became an interesting challenge. And in full truth and fairness, they did do what was asked, but a lot of it was done way after the fact. And that also became interesting as well.
So, Debbie, do you still have another question?
I can wait my turn. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Well, we're running out of time. And
Question.
Maxie?
Yeah,
Okay.
quick one. And I talked with you about it, Bruce. Can another department propose a name for a geographic place? Another
Yes.
department?
Yes, they
Yeah,
can.
in certain circumstances, they can. And I think I'd have to go back and look at the legislative requirement that any proposal they make for a name change, I guess within their jurisdiction, I think, has to be approved by if they have a governing board or whatever their structure is. But that is possible. Again, here too, transportation initiatives are no longer part of our purview on geographic naming, where they were at one time. And I'm glad we don't have them anymore.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
quick story, and then I want to talk about just board things going forward, and maybe we'll run over just a little bit. It's interesting how many news stories I've heard about early Black settlement in Vermont, down in Windham County. I don't know if you've seen the V.T. Digger piece
Yes.
on the poet Lucy Prince. And the legislature actually passed some resolution on it, and they now have, I guess, a marker that's going to go up, historical marker, which is rather interesting. And I followed up with Charlie Marchant from the Townsend Historical Society after the meeting, because he had sent something in. And just one person, this fella, Commodore Bush, who Charlie has a memorial for Commodore Bush in the cemetery in Townsend. And it's a fascinating story, and fascinating how someone is dedicated at the local level, as Charlie is a great resource. Commodore Bush was a free Black man who came to Vermont from Hudson, New York, settled in Bellows Falls as a barber. And he, during the Civil War, the feds had a quota of soldiers they wanted from the states, and the state then set quotas for the individual towns. And Townsend was behind on their quota, and they would pay a bounty to people to join up. Well, Commodore Bush, I guess, indicated he would like to be counted towards Townsend's quota. And they paid him, I think, $410, and the state gave $400. So Commodore Bush has got the highest amount of quota paid to an individual soldier in Vermont during the Civil War.
Ooh, Bruce, add one thing too. What people don't know is this adds some flavor to the story because it's an amazing story. He is what would be considered passing for white, but that also became a problem, and Bruce can tell you why.
Well, he was assigned to the Vermont, I guess, 8th Infantry or something, and they discovered he was Black. And so they assigned him, because he wasn't living in Townsend, they assigned him to the colored troops. And at the end of the war, the white troops were dismissed, or whatever they use for the disenrolled, or in the military, I forget the term, but they kept the Black troops on, and they were sending them to Texas, which is important because there were renegade Confederates still enforcing slavery in Texas, which led to Juneteenth. Their liberation led to this Juneteenth holiday. Commodore Bush was on a steamboat to be shipped out with other Black troops to Texas in the James River. I'm sorry James isn't here because it is in Richmond, where he's from. He fell into the water and drowned. Well, Charlie didn't stop there. He found out that they denied Commodore Bush's second wife, his first wife died, a widow's pension because they said he was trying to desert. Well, Charlie pressed further and found a hearing record. Commodore Bush, a little mundane thing, had stood on the gunwale of the steamboat to take a leak, quite frankly, into the James River. And the boat started up and it jarred him. He fell in and was drowning. And the Union officers prevented his colleagues from jumping in to save him. So Charlie doesn't know where Commodore Bush is buried, if at all. His wife did get the pension, but Charlie, on his own effort, petitioned the feds for a headstone memorializing Commodore Bush, and it's in the Townsend Cemetery. And it's quite a story. It's a very rich story. It's not altogether a pleasant story, but again, an example of why touching base with local people who have a real affinity and dedication to the community is important. And I'll leave it at that. I thought I just wanted to share it with you because I think Charlie Marchant has done a wonderful job down there. He's a wonderful resource. So let's talk about some board issues going forward. One of the things, by our next meeting, I would like, I mean, maybe it's already, but I really want to have a handle on where everybody is with their, if they've been reappointed, where they are in their term, were they appointed to fill an unexpired term? That's very important, so that, you know, Deb and I will be transitioning off supposedly after the end of February, except
And
there's
Bruce,
a question.
doesn't Deb have an idea? I mean, we did talk about it when Josh was here, ex emeriti.
Well, that's the emeriti to keep in the loop on things like this, but I'm trying to get everything set up so that we're not scrambling in January thinking, oh, so-and-so needs to be reappointed, or we need to have people, to replace Deb and me. I'd like to have us thinking ahead of time about that. So hopefully at the October meeting, we'll go into this in more depth. But also in the interim, Adrian raised a very good point about just getting how we could get together in person, even if it's a special meeting to tour the state library. I don't know. I think Tom may have been around the state. I don't know about anybody else. And maybe we could do that based on discussion, try to set something up in August or September or whatever, or unless we do an in-person meeting in October, which quite frankly, I have no idea what the situation will be like with the pandemic. So this is why I just wanted to introduce these topics. And now that I see they put up the board roster, so take over, Jason or Sherry or whatever. And then board, interrupt me, please.
One thing I noticed is my name is not spelled correctly, and I don't believe that's the term ending. And I also received my certificate that was signed with the incorrect spelling of my name. I would love for that to be fixed at one point. Things are busy with COVID.
Adrian,
but yes.
What's the spelling?
No, this
it's
this
Adriene. It should be also my profile.
I thought I looked it up on. I'll have to check their boards and the boards and commissions on the website again. I thought they had changed it, but I'll check. And you said it's not your date, your end date?
No. Thank you for correcting the name. I know that autocorrect also tends to add an extra N.
Yeah.
I see it's spelled right though in your email address.
Yeah. I think I just spelled it wrong in that. So Adrian, what is your end date?
2024, I believe.
Adrian, were you appointed to fill an unexpired term?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't
I don't think so.
I don't think she was, proposed her and just for just to fill the position. I don't think it was an expired term.
That's one of the things, I don't know, we'll have to check that out with the governor's office somehow, because I think Deb and I were both filled unexpired terms, and we both came on about the same time. So our first term was 3 years long, and then we got reappointed twice. So when we get done, we will have been on the board for 11 years. And if you are starting a term that's just vacant, but it's not an unexpired term, it's a new term, then the max you can serve generally is 8 years. So I want to get this straight, and I also want to make sure that we don't leave any gaps once Deb and I have to leave the board. And then there's the question, if we don't have a replacement, can we still serve in lieu of not having a placement? If we, this is why I want to think down board about this.
So I have an email out to Victoria. She's the boards and commissions person. We had been talking back and forth back in March, and she was supposed to have fixed the page. I noticed when I went on and over the last couple of days that the dates are still wrong, but they do have James and Adrian as 2024. So, 2023. So I'd already emailed her, so I'll email her just to make sure that these dates are correct. And I've asked her to send me every board member's, I can't remember the document that you guys have to sign.
Yeah.
Yes.
So because I don't have any of those, except I think I have Adrian's, and she sent it to me, so I can check those dates again.
Okay.
But yeah, so I have that. I'm waiting for her to update that page, and I'm waiting for all of those forms to come so I can double check all of these dates, because those are the dates I have right now.
Okay, Linda. I see your email address.
Right, so I have a statement of appointment for to replace Torres on 1st, 2019, to serve until 2020. So apparently that was filling 1 year of a term. But I also have an appointment that says is appointed for the term of 4 years or the balance thereof from April 2019. So I guess I was supposed to serve until 2020 and then was supposed to get reappointed, but that I do not have a reappointment. I did sign though recently, and I can't remember when that was. I can look that up. I did sign that document from the state, that whatever that was, I signed that. So they apparently think I'm still on the board.
You did sign for the newest one?
Yeah.
Okay.
What's that? An ethics declaration of some kind?
Something like that. Yeah, right.
Yeah, because she had contacted me a while ago for email, so I thought she had sent everybody all of their new appointment docs. So I'll wait and see what she sends to me. You guys some of you may get, like Linda or Tom, I noticed your dates were still not right on the website. So you guys might see something from Victoria, from the governor's office.
Okay.
Some mess up, yeah.
You can't believe how messy it was after Peter Shumlin left. Nothing against Peter Shumlin, but it was a real.
It was a mess. I know that. So that's
It
why
was
I'm very patient with the new governor, because I knew it was horrendous.
Yeah, and they're still working on it, but it's still a work in progress because there's still problems. But yeah.
So, just let me ask quickly. So Deb and I are going to be off. Maxie, is this your last term ending in 2023? What?
Correct. I'm going off, and I have been like you. I filled out somebody's position and then served 2 terms. So, and I have a question. Do we ever do active recruiting?
I,
And I know we all have kind of done informally, and then the governor has some thoughts on who he wants to appoint. Also, this is a two-part question. You know, with you and Deb going off the board, we're losing a lot of institutional memory. So is there a chance of having you continue maybe in a sort of honorary? I don't know. Other boards have done
well,
it.
That has been a
well, it's
question, though. That has been a
that
question.
yeah, yeah. That the emerity thing, and I don't think we have to solve that today, but certainly that would be helpful. I did want to just go down this list of expired terms. So, Tom, is that 2025? Is that the end of your tenure completely?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And then Adrian, and we're working on Linda, Adrian, and James. On terms of recruiting, the governor has this big website on, commission appointments, and it'll advertise vacancies. But how many people know about that? I know Scott. I don't know how. Well, I was the last minute afterthought of Jim Douglas's staff. I mean, really, I think I was the last thing they thought about before he left office. And I don't know how Deb got appointed. I know Scott Murphy, when he was state librarian, recommended Tom because Scott had had experience with Tom with the Milton Board of Libraries. And I know Tom, I guess, knows Adrian's dad. And Adrian
and
expressed,
Adrian and I knew from her dad her life story. I think sometimes as a good father, and I said yes, you'd be fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Just to add this, if you guys can see the boards and commissions, this is the website. So they have changed the process where you need to do this online application. So I don't think we can do the recommendation anymore. Somebody will have to go in and fill this out. So we can recommend them to go fill this out.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I think, for instance, James Saunders, he wrote a really articulate, thoughtful, sensitive letter on Negro Brook a year and a half or so ago, and I saw it in 7 days. And I, through the power of the internet, I dragged down who he, found out who he was, and he still had his Purdue mailing address, and I wrote him. And we ended up talking, and I asked him if he'd be interested in being on the board. And that's how that happened. So we might not have active recruitment, but I encourage anybody on the library board to say, hey, listen, this. And I also, I'm very happy we have an active librarian on the board, and particularly someone who brings down our average age quite a bit.
Oh, yeah, that was my view.
But I had recommended someone when Marty was the state librarian, and she thought that was the worst idea ever. And I guess there was some history, and you don't want to give. Yeah, I mean, there was some concern. They can direct things to their library, and I just felt, we've got Maxie's wonderful experience, having been, the director of the largest public library in the state outside of the universities, and Debbie and Linda have that great experience as trustees. James's thoughts, Tom's experience with the Able Library and Milton Public Library. I mean, this is fantastic stuff. And I don't want, and now Adrian, you're bringing some insights that I don't think about. And I think that's beneficial, particularly in providing the advice function that we provide to the state librarian. And I also want to thank Jason for being so receptive to getting advice from us, and just not reporting in didactic things.
Well, I do appreciate that. And Bruce, you and I talk more because I'm the secretary and you're the chair, but the board doesn't know, but Bruce knows of my need to do this, and I'll give you just a snapshot. Vermonters understood I left the job in Savannah, Georgia, and they still look at me like, you're crazy. You left Savannah to come to Vermont? We're doing the opposite. What's wrong with you? We're going down south. But he understood what I went through by talking to some people and the secretary of the agency, who said, this is a person who really will seek out information. And my public library board and Live Public Library was just extremely helpful. There were people very similar to you, and it was much larger, but we had to have some sessions where I had to really tell them some things, and they were like, this has never been done before, and here's how we're going to help you. And so I found that boards, when you really give them what they not need to know, but to say, here's what it is. I'm asking for your help. What are your thoughts? And this is what this board has been to me. So I thank you, because it's not been easy. And I know the conversations have been hard, but my role I see is to tell you the facts and my thoughts and say, but here are the parameters we have to operate within. What can you do to help me make this successful? Or how do we jettison this if you can assist me in that? So I thank you in being the people who you are to say, all right, this is tough, but here's how we're going to probably do this. And I think Adrian has a question.
Okay, Adrian. Okay, well, let me just pose this question before we end then. Would you like the potential for getting together, perhaps in Barrie at the State Department, depending on COVID restrictions, if ending or stuff like that? If we can put out a little poll, we can do it in August or early September or something, to maybe we could have lunch together so we could talk and tour the facility. And now, if we're all, yes, and but also, if we're all together or quorums together, that's a public meeting, so we'd have to advertise it as such. But if folks are interested in that, I'll talk to Jason more offline, and we could send out a doodle poll or whatever it is, and try to set that up. So then, I actually miss some of you. I miss all of you. And, we had a great time. My granddaughter and my daughter went down to see Maxie, and it was so touching, little Margot at 7 months had no stranger danger when it came to Maxie. And Maxie spoke in such gentle German to Margot, who's learning both English and German at such a young age. And it really adds to the really treasured experience of being on this particular board. So with that thought, if you're interested in maybe a possible event in Barrie at the department, and the opportunity to see what's done, really, it's too bad that the department staff has been out of that building for such a long time, because it was really a wonderful advancement, I think, in getting the staff together at that location and co-locating it with the Vermont Historical Society, which they had been done before. So,
and in closing then, Bruce, if you need any other further suggestion as why you might want to come here, I would be happy to reconstruct for you something that you have asked about my culinary skills, and I can easily make you a butter-crusted southern sweet potato pie with coconut topping, or a chocolate cake made from buttermilk.
I'm in.
Hey, just give me a date and a time. I shall be there.
Okay, so I guess then we'll do that and send something out. Jason and I will talk about identifying some potential times as candidates. Yes. And it would be really cool. Adrian, I really want to thank you. And I think Maxie also weighed in on this. And we'll follow up. I also want to thank you all so much for your attentiveness and sensitivity and wisdom and actually candor on the Negro Brook hearing. That was not easy. And I can tell you personally, it was not easy on me for over a year, and not on Jason either. I don't need to go into the details, but it was in some cases a very painful, unpleasant experience. And I think we've all learned from it. I think the petitioners learned from it too. So hopefully it works out for the best. And so with no further thoughts, I'd entertain.
Adrian has a question, right? Adrian never had a chance. She
No.
had her
No,
hand
she,
waved.
she took down her hand. So
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
so
Thanks, though.
so if I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, Deb.
Deb moves.
Second,
Second.
Linda.
All in favor by saying aye.
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 And
Anybody
great-
opposed?
Great meeting. Thank you all.
Okay,
Take
we're
care.
adjourned.
Thank
We're
you.
adjourned.
Bye.
Well, exactly 2 hours. Exactly 2 hours to the minute. So there you go.
Oh,
Bye
Take
bye.
care.
Okay, that's dangerous. How that happened. Okay.